contact for your client that's more likely to know where they are in physical space, that the client feels comfortable with you contacting if you're concerned. Or there are other ways of developing an emergency plan, but you need to be developing it ahead of time. And then there are all of these kind of data security concerns. Please don't use Skype. Please, you should not be using Skype. The vast majority of freely available platforms you should not be using. The vast majority aren't even HIPAA compliant, let alone meet the Canadian standards. The US is a bigger market, so often you can get some, there are some free online counseling programs that I can recommend for my students now in the US, but a lot of those they may be compliant in the US, that doesn't mean they're compliant in Canada. And even then, a lot of the big platforms, Skype isn't HIPAA compliant, right? A lot of these big public platforms that people are using to do online counseling don't meet data security and data safety standards. So just be very careful what you're choosing to use, and particularly if you're working on behalf of an organization, that's something you should be consulting with someone with some expertise in selecting online counseling platforms. You should be talking to people who know what the platforms are, and then keep on top of them, because even if you find a platform that's compliant today, that doesn't mean they're compliant 3 or 6 months from now. So again, it's a constantly making sure that you're meeting your professional obligations. And then there are big cross-jurisdictional concerns as well. So say you're providing online counseling to a client who lives in Ontario, and you live in Ontario as well, but then that client moves to BC. And suddenly you're providing services in British Columbia when you are registered only with the college in Ontario, right? I see this a lot, again, in the US with cross-state counseling, where a professional social worker is licensed in Ohio, where I am, but their client has moved to Nebraska or to Kentucky, and they are suddenly not compliant because they're delivering services in a state they are not licensed in. And there's just a lack, again, same as with apps, there's a lack of regulation and oversight in how data is maintained and treated and secured, all of that. So there are huge concerns. And then finally, moving into digital community practice and some of the cool things that you can do with technology. So there's lots of opportunities for digital advertising campaigns, either you as an individual practitioner or your organization, as well as sort of public health campaigns. So this is by the Colorado Office of Suicide Prevention. So we know men are less likely to access mental health services when they need them, are more likely to complete suicide attempts. So they have a Man Therapy public health campaign around, it's get a physical for your feelings, but it's a physical for your feelings, but you get to keep your pants on. So it's encouraging. It's a whole thing around how to help for men who might access the website, to how they can go about getting services, but also for family members who are struggling to help their loved ones into service. So it's essentially a public health campaign, and there's lots of examples of these kind of viral public health campaigns available. But again, you could also just be advertising your organization, advertising the services you offer. There's lots of different ways you can sort of use digital advertising, either free or quite low cost, to be able to do a lot of really cool outreach things. Then, of course, there is digital advocacy and information activism. So this is an example. It's called Won't Buy Unilever. So the rapper here is actually lives or did live in Toronto, but this was about an issue where Unilever, we're all familiar, right? They make soap and body wash and own a million different companies. They were pouring pollution into a river in India. And we're just doing it. There were no consequences to it. So this organization and this musician redid a Nicki Minaj song talking about this environmental violation. And you might not be able to see because it's pretty small, but they got about 4 million views on this first video. They had a follow-up video. They got tons of news attention. Unilever, whether they took this, there's a lot of debate about whether they did enough, but they had to respond to it. So these kind of viral social justice organizing campaigns, I'm sure you can think of lots of different examples. Black Lives Matter has done some really different branches of Black Lives Matter has done some really cool viral campaigns. So it draws attention to social issues. And again, this is a big, broad international scope, but this could be something as small as your community, in the community you practice in, drawing attention to a social issue or an injustice there. And then finally, we get to the money. Digital fundraising. So for example, the Ice Bucket Challenge. So there was a lot of critique of the Ice Bucket Challenge, saying a lot of people who did it for the clicks or did it for the likes. So they never actually donated, right? So they did it, they poured the water, they posted it, got all the tweets and retweets they wanted, and then never donated. But even if only 50% of people donated, even if only 30% of people donated, the Ice Bucket Challenge has resulted in over $26 million for the ALS societies in Canada and over $100 million for the ALS Association in the US. And they are now directly linking this money and its investment in research to changes in outcomes for ALS. So again, big example, but I work with a small LGBTQ youth organization in Columbus, Ohio, and every Friday they have a fundraising Friday, right, where they might get a couple of $100 donated on Facebook. And through a Facebook fundraising campaign. And that's enough to hold one other night of services, or to buy pizza for the pizza and a movie night, or to get an extra 20 kids bus passes, right, for the month. So it can be on a much smaller scale, but there's a lot of opportunity to raise funds, draw attention, and all of that. And then finally, moving into the deep future, or not so deep future of social work. For those of you who aren't familiar with artificial intelligence, here's a definition. It's computer systems that are able to perform tasks normally requiring human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision-making, and translation between languages. So this kind of technology can provide access to real-time assessment, intervention, and feedback using AI, using artificial intelligence. It's already being used. If you have ever texted with Rogers or Bell or any big public company on their website, you're talking to an AI. They may have a picture of a person. It's not a person. At least initially, you're talking to an AI, and we're already seeing them in healthcare. They're shifting into healthcare, into mental health provision. So those kinds of what are called chatbots are becoming more and more prevalent. And often when I start talking about AI and social work, people go like, how is this relevant? So I like this quote. Asking if AI has significance to social work is like asking if counselors should be concerned with global warming or if social media has an impact on the lives of our clients. AI promises to touch the emotional lives of our clients in untold ways. So this being the future example, so this is Ellie. She's a virtual therapist. She's an AI. Who was developed by some researchers at USC, and the person is filmed as they're talking to Ellie, and she detects signs of depression. So she was originally developed to work with veterans. So she detects signs of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder in her patients by tracking and responding to their visual and verbal cues. So again, this is sort of the deep future, but we're already seeing there's a lot of critique in AI already about the way AIs are written and the consequences they're having. So AIs are already discriminating against already marginalized groups because of who's writing the artificial intelligences and then who they're being tested on. So we're already seeing discrimination that we experience in society being reproduced in artificial intelligence. So I do this as a little bit of a like, cool, right? But also to say that social workers need to be aware of this kind of stuff. Virtual reality is another big area that's sort of exploding in its connections to social work. And we need to be engaging with these emerging digital opportunities to ensure that they're being designed well and that they're being designed and then implemented well and in the best, again, going back to the code of ethics, in the best interest of our clients. So not doing this because it's something cool or it's something we can do, but because it's actually in some way helpful to our clients and the people that we're serving. So AI and other kinds of digital technologies like this have significant potential for social work, but only if they're developed thoughtfully and implemented well. So that is it for me, and I'm open for questions. Oh, I see hands in the back. You might just have to yell. Yeah. Yes, sorry. So in the back there, she was asking a question about LGBTQ, the fact that one of my areas of expertise is in LGBTQ populations, and I didn't use the I in the acronym. Um, and so, yeah, I often shorten the acronym, particularly when I'm not talking specifically about LGBTQIA2S issues. But yes, so a significant minority of the population identifies as intersex, right? And I can't speak to the particular case that you're speaking to, but I can say, tying it back to technology, one of the areas I work on most is around how underrepresented and marginalized sexual and gender minority groups actually use the internet to do a lot of this work, right? To draw attention to their identities, to draw attention to injustices that happen related to their identities, to engage in identity development and community advocacy. So I'm not sure, like, we can certainly speak afterwards if you have specific questions, and I would love to know more about the case you're talking about. Yeah, but, oh, I'll start at the front and move my way back, I guess. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so, go ahead. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, no, that's a good question. You should always be asking yourself. So the question was around the fact that data, not knowing sort of where data is stored, or not realizing that saying something putting a client's name in a platform like that, data may actually be, even though you're typing it here in Canada, might be stored on a server in the US. Just a lot of these sort of publicly available platforms, you use the example of Slack, but any of them I can name, Facebook, Facebook Messenger, which like a lot of us just use for casual communication, all of them, where does the data go? Right? It's a huge problem, and and that we need to be paying attention to where the servers are, and then obviously because of where the servers are, what kind of legislation or policies that data may be subject to, like the Patriot Act, for example, in the U.S. But there are also ones here in Canada that to be concerned about. So where the data is, right? It's just a broadly, and again, I can't speak to necessarily specific platforms, and that can change quite quickly. They may move where their servers are. They may move. But not knowing where, so that's why I always say be very cautious before you type anything into the internet, or anything that uses a web-based communication service. So they're doing they're doing some stuff with chatbots and Facebook. I was in a meeting about it a couple of days ago, and so even though a client's communicating with a chatbot you're providing on Facebook Messenger, so you get to keep a copy of that data, but Facebook gets to keep a copy of that data, right? And what are the consequences? So I'm just going to I see it, yes. So I am not going to say that anyone in particular is going to meet the requirements. My response is always to go back to the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers, to their professional practice, and ask about it, because it changes. And I've now been out of Canada for 9 months, right? And even then, I don't feel comfortable saying what you should be using, just that you should be picking very carefully and making sure you meet the standards that you need to meet in particular. Sorry, I'm not going to give you an answer. Yes, at the back. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually at we have a pretty nice VR lab at Ohio State. I was actually at their open house about 2 weeks ago. So for example, one of my colleagues who works with older adults has a VR program where student social workers and other kinds of professionals are able to experience what it's like to have dementia, to be an older adult with dementia. And they actually, so they have the VR headset on, but then they also have a trained actor in the room with them, and they're able to experience, and so this particular platform is around empathy building, right? Around teaching people what it's really like to live with dementia. I've also seen it used quite successfully with PTSD. It's used a lot with veterans and PTSD, so for exposure therapy, so it'll put them back in the context of the story of the narrative they're telling, everything from they can adjust the light in the situation and hear planes flying overhead, like they get to re-experience it as part of the therapeutic process. There's a whole group with the Council on Social Work Education in the US that focuses on technology, and a big part of their focus is on VR and how VR can be used, as the cost of VR is decreasing so fast, right? I'm also looking at it for some potential around therapeutic opportunities to sort of to engage in one-on-one experiences with your client. There's tons of different examples of how it's being used related to social work. ACAD, I'd have to, so yeah, it's actually housed in the arts department at Ohio State. I can look it up for you after, come see me, and I'll look them up for you, and I can tell you what their address is. Because they have a bunch of little commercials for their different VR experiences that would be interesting. Yeah. Yes. They do. Others in the room may know better than me. So yes, University of Toronto, the Master's of Social Work program, they offer an online counseling specific program, or online counseling specific course, I'm sorry. I've heard of some other ones, but there's not one that I can say off the top of my head is a good one. But if there's other suggestions, I'm certainly welcome to hear it. Yes, at the back. Yep. Yeah. So the question, just for the on video, was around not having been on social media platforms and perhaps now feeling some pressure to be on them, but not feeling comfortable with it and not wanting to be. And I think, you know what, if that's your comfort level and you've, again, if you've thought about it and you're not, it's just taking everything into account, you're not comfortable with it, that's fine, right? That's what that's your comfort level, and you've realized for you it's just not what you want, and that you realize that there may be some potential, like that you can't be found in a professional capacity, and there may be some limitations to that. But if that's your comfort level, I think that's great. It sounds like you've thought through it and it's well reasoned, right? Yeah. I would not, I'm seeing some hands in the room. I would not be surprised, based off Dr. Faye Mishna's research into technology and practice, which I was somewhat involved with when I was still a PhD student. I'm not surprised at all to hear that that is the case, right? And that some people are not comfortable with it. And that's, again, I think that's good. As long as you've thought through it and you've reasoned it well and you have I think that's fine. You're cutting off some opportunities, but there's also certainly some benefits to it, both for you, probably mental health and personally wise, as well as professionally. Yeah. Yes. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's one of the reasons I say training, because the training, a good cyber counseling training will address because you can't, that's one of the biggest things. You can't control the context. You can't control the situation the same way you would in an in-person situation or counseling situation. It's absolutely right. And I think you spoke to it better than I could have, that there are significant benefits. There are certainly risks and difficulties, and good preparation for providing service will prepare you for how to navigate a lot of that. And as you mentioned, sort of set it up with your client ahead of time, like helping them make sure that they think about being in a private space, that they think about where they keep the login information for the counseling platform, all of that, right? So that's where you could do a whole 12-week course on online counseling. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's so individualized. Yeah, absolutely. No, it's there, and the real difficulty, I think, broadly speaking, with technology and practices, we're always, to some extent, going to be lagging behind where the client population, and especially when you talk about that demographic, right? Like they'd rather sit in a room with you and text and not speak to you, right? Yeah, which I've certainly have had people tell me their clients want to do, right? So yeah, but to some extent, we do as a discipline need to be thinking about moving forward. And so, for example, the Council of Social Work Education in the U.S. has just added a pile of new standards around preparing for the changes in technology and things like that. Yeah, yeah. I have time for one more right up here, and I can answer one-on-one questions afterwards. Yeah. Yep. Yep. So, yeah, it's even for me, right? Driving back and forth, I'm back and forth a lot. Yep, I keep all my data encrypted, and I remove the fingerprint. Like, there's lots of different things. So it's just making it harder for my data to be accessed at the border if I was to, or I would delete, I sometimes delete, you can delete your work email off your device before you take it across the border. You want to make sure that the backlog of data has been deleted as well, not just the new content, but there's a bunch. It depends, and again, I would say it depends on your organization, the kinds of data you're carrying. Even me at Ohio State, they're less concerned about a social worker moving research data across than someone working for the NSA, for example. But they have certain procedures I have to follow, all of that. So yeah, it is something certainly if you're traveling with your device and anything related to your work or profession to think about. Maybe it's not realistic to leave the phone at home, right? But maybe you put a new SIM card in it, or maybe you delete some things before you leave, all of that. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm happy to answer questions. I'm not going anywhere. That's always my recommendation. Yeah, is to ask. Great, thank you.
Well, yes, I just want to say thank you to Dr. for do's and don'ts, thinking proactively, thinking ethically. There's a lot of information to absorb.
Yes.
And I'm hopeful that we can take some of this back about opportunities as well with that live within our comfort zone and practice. So I think that officially wraps up.
Great.